Okay, we all know by now that the Surrender Dems have carried out one of the most spectacularly foolish and unstrategic moves in American history. 7 Democrats and independent Angus King, who caucuses with the Democrats, decided to betray the American people and cave. And if you think for a moment that it was just those 8 and that was not carefully coordinated, why is it that all 8 of them are either retiring or are not up for re-election until at least 2028? I do think it's interesting that a number of these senators, Jeanne Shaheen, Angus King, who betrayed all of us, decided to make the rounds of corporate legacy media. How long until their book deals are announced? Anyway, they were trying to justify their actions. And Angus King, in particular, had this to say.
Well, Joe, you have to go back to what the strategy was at the beginning of the shutdown. There were 2 goals, both of which I support. One was standing up to Donald Trump. The other was getting some resolution on the ACA premium tax credit.
Wow, almost octogenarian. Angus King, that's a really weird way to characterize the 3 demands that Democrats had. Number 1, reversing the devastating Medicaid cuts that will be depriving 14 million Americans of health care. Number 2, restoring the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Why are you trying to make it sound like it was less than that? And number 3, when you say standing up to Donald Trump, you mean getting rid of the terrible rescission powers that Republicans in Congress have given Donald Trump. Because with those practically monarchical rescission powers, any money that you appropriate, he'll just be like, no, I'm not going to allow that money to go there. I'm going to move it over here, which is why no promise from the Republicans in Congress can possibly be believed or honored without some guarantee of reining in Donald Trump's extraordinary power that they have extended to him. But none of that really matters because y'all threw all of those demands away in exchange for the possibility of a floor vote that y'all are not going to win on a 1-year extension. And now Mike Johnson has said he's not going to allow that to come to the floor at all. But let's hear some more, Angus, about why you and 7 other senators and who knows who else behind the scenes felt that you had the right to fuck it all up for 340 million of us.
The problem was the shutdown wasn't accomplishing either goals.
That's not true.
And there was there was 0 likelihood that it was going to. In terms of standing up to Donald Trump, the shutdown actually gave him more power. Exhibit A being what he's done with SNAP and SNAP benefits across the country. Oh, by the way, Joe, you're going to love this. Guess who's getting paid during the shutdown?
We know you are, Angus King.
Not the park rangers or air traffic controllers, the ICE agents. Under special law, under that big, awful bill that they passed last summer, the ICE agents are being paid. Nobody else is.
That's not true.
So
you are.
Standing up to Donald Trump didn't work. It actually gave him more power.
This is the kind of feebleness of thinking, the complete lack of strategy that we have from our leadership in the United States Senate. First of all, how dare you bring up SNAP benefits? Y'all caved while there were multiple cases working through the courts. You didn't even wait to hear how things worked out after Ketanji Brown Jackson sent those cases back for the lower courts to consider, where they ruled that Donald Trump has to release the funds. You cannot use SNAP as an excuse for your behavior. Number 2, how dare you say ICE is getting paid during the shutdown and nobody else is? You are getting paid. You get your platinum level health care. And also, the reason that ICE is being paid, the reason that ICE has been allowed to terrorize communities all over this country is because Congress has allowed that to happen. I noticed that none of the demands that you all made, Democrats, included any remedy, any protections for the American people, for our immigrant neighbors, from the illegal, brutal, violent actions of ICE. How come y'all didn't list that amongst your demands? And when you talk about federal employees being furloughed during this period, my congresswoman mentioned the fact that federal credit unions will extend 0 interest loans to federal employees who are not getting paid during a shutdown. There were other remedies. And by the way, how dare you use federal employees in this way? Overwhelmingly, we heard from federal employees who said, do not cave. You don't get to use federal employees as an excuse for your behavior because they said we are willing to make this sacrifice on behalf of the healthcare of millions and millions of Americans. They said, do not cave or our sacrifice will have been for nothing. And you are trying to use them in this interview. Which brings me to my last point. You said standing up to Donald Trump wasn't working. So your plan is capitulation. You're just going to Neville Chamberlain that shit. You're just going to Vichy France that shit. What you're saying is that you extremely wealthy Senate Democrats had no interest in protecting the welfare, the lives, the health insurance, the freedom of the American people. Because it was hard and it was a few weeks in and you didn't want to have to keep doing it. Y'all are gutless cowards. You have no spine. You have no endurance. You have no concept of how to fight this fight. You're not fighters. The fact that a bunch of old fucks who think that this is 1975 politics, the fact that y'all think that your Republican colleagues are actually your colleagues instead of literal fascists, the fact that you think some handshake deal is going to get you a 1-year extension on the ACA, it's not. You're not going to get a vote on it. And if you do, it's not going to pass and it's not going to go to the House. And if by some miracle all of that happens, Donald Trump will just say, no, I'm not giving out that money. You fucked all of us for nothing. And I know we've all been really angry about it for the last few days, and I'm not going to continue to be full of rage in every single post. I actually want to spend some time this evening talking about what we the people do next, because it's really clear to me that we don't actually have a united opposition party. Billionaires and fascism go hand in hand, and who is running so many of our Senate Democrats? Billionaires, dark money, corporate money, foreign money. So of course, they're not actually going to be an opposition party. But that just brings us back to the reality that it is us, the people, who are going to save us. It was never going to be politicians. Way back at the beginning of the year, gosh, it was like February or something, I went to my Senator Ron Wyden's town hall. It was packed. I actually had to stand in the hallway because the gymnasium was full and they had a speaker into the hallway. And one of my first viral videos that I put out on TikTok this year was my account of that town hall where I said I realized that our elected officials were not going to save us. They were not prepared to meet the moment, and that really it was going to be up to us. Elected officials are a tool that we can wield if they work for us. But it is the people organizing that ultimately are going to save us from fascism. And we are organizing. I think what happened this week, all that it's going to do is activate so many more people. It's really unfortunate that establishment Democrats are not actually our allies in the fight against fascism. They're too weak and spineless. They're too bought and paid for this fight. But these new data points that we got on Sunday, it just crystallizes for us. It just clarifies for us who is on our side and how we need to tweak and adjust our strategy going forward so that we can be successful. The Surrender Dems will go down in history as a disgrace. I also think this moment in history will be recorded as a moment when we, the people, launched our country into a period of tremendous political reform. You may wonder what I mean by that. I'm going to let Ezra Levin from Indivisible explain.
Throw their hands up and say, well, I guess none of this matters. We can check out. That's really dangerous. When an authoritarian is terrorizing our communities, as we just heard from Castro, they are invading our cities. They are zip tying children and dragging them out of their apartments, in some cases naked. They're tear gassing children on the street. These images are horrific, and we need a unified opposition party to this. Mm-hmm. We can't afford to check out because otherwise they win. So let me say a couple things. Angus King doesn't live in the same world that you and I live in, doesn't live in the same world that most rank and file Democrats live in, because everybody else who was watching this was saying, Democrats are winning this fight for the first time. For the first time in a year, we felt like the wind was at our backs. We had the largest peaceful protest in American history, followed by the best election night in a decade plus, with the Republicans fracturing, with Trump blaming the shutdown for their losses, with Democratic approvals for the first time increasing because people were seeing them fight back, and with public polling showing that Democrats were winning the fight. That was the context for, you called it a deal or a deal with the devil. I call it a surrender, an utter capitulation. They got nothing. Nothing. And so after a year spent organizing to try to convince the Democratic Party to unify and oppose this regime, here's where I am. Yeah. The time for convincing is over. We need new leadership. And the place to demand new leadership is the primaries. And that's right around the corner. But we have to demand a better party. We have to demand a party that fights, because Chuck Schumer isn't listening anymore. Angus King isn't listening anymore. These Dems who are siding with the Republicans, they're not listening anymore. And we can't afford that. We need an effective Democratic Party that will fight back.
Indivisible has announced indivisible2026.org. If you want to know what Ezra means, go check it out.